Welcome to the first ever episode of Chorus. My name is Ji Heng, and in this series of podcasts, we will be sharing interesting insights on travel and to promote the positive impacts created through tourism. On every episode, we will be inviting a special guest from the travel industry who will be sharing their best practices and to open up the discussion on sustainability in tourism. And today, I'm very honored and happy to have with me someone whom I'm very familiar with, who is Benoit Badouf. Good afternoon, Benoit.
Good afternoon, Jihang.
How are you today?
I am very well and excited.
Would you like to kindly introduce yourself to the audience?
Of course. My name is Benoit Badouf. I am 52 years old. I am French, and I've been promoting and marketing travel and tourism for the last decades. And I'm based in Singapore.
Talking about travel and tourism in particular, I have to mention that 2020 was an exceptionally interesting and strange year because international travel was restricted. I think for once in my lifetime at least, we saw that travel was a luxury and a privilege because previously it had always been something that was a given. And so with that, Benoit, how do you feel about the travel industry as a whole as it stands today?
Yeah, it has felt like a privilege because we can't do it, right? So usually when you can't do something, you think that other people can. Like, for example, you can't afford to buy a Ferrari, but other people do. So you think that this is the extreme luxury that you can think of. But what's interesting is that nobody has been able to travel pretty much this year. So it's a new kind of luxury, if you will. It's been really complicated. I think the world was taken by surprise. Nobody thought that it was going to last that long, and I think that the year 2020 was used forcibly or not as a mean to reflect on our condition as human beings, but also on the way we should see travel and tourism. Because it's arguably one of the very things that people have been craving for a whole year and until now, actually, because we're now broadcasting in February 2021.
Yeah, we're in February 2021, and I would say it's almost 1 year since everything was put to a halt. Yeah,
it is 1 year.
And coming to 2021, there are definitely new things that we have to look out for, new things that we need to expect. And one of the things that the World Health Organization actually put out to the Western countries is the notion of having a new normal with regards to, there's new practices, new way of life. And in Singapore, where we're based in, this concept of new normal has been ingrained in all of us. So, Benoit, what do you think would be the new normal that you foresee for traveling?
It's an interesting expression. I don't know if I like it too much because it suggests that there will never be a way to go back to some of the things that we once knew. I think we will, to some degree, be able to come back to some of the things that we once knew. So it's a temporary new normal. What I wanted to point out, what this idea brings to my mind is that there has always been a new normal. Maybe you are a bit too young to remember that. You were probably not traveling extensively at that time, but in 2001, on 11 September 2001, following the terrorist attacks in the US, there has been a series of implementations which were, concerning the airports, the aircrafts, every aspect of security was addressed in that frame, and passengers had to go through a lot of new procedures that proved very tedious, and people were relenting. I remember myself checking in Beijing in 2004 and seeing those enormous queues and thinking, oh my God, I'm going to miss my plane. And of course, what did I do the next time? I just left 1 hour before. So that's an example of what people started to do, because they needed to do that. They needed to understand that there was a new normal, and then they needed to go by it. So I think the year 2020 and the COVID year and the aftermath will bring a certain degree of a new normal, which will be a bit different, but it will be added on the layer that September 11 already added in the early 2000s. It will be, of course, about sanitary measures this time. It will be about vaccination. It will be about proving to your airline and to the airport that you penetrate in the first place that you're someone who's vaccinated, and you're ticking the boxes that will have to be defined in a multilateral manner by the world community. We're still quite far from it, actually.
Indeed, we took quite quickly to be able to adapt to these new security procedures at the airports. But when it comes to the new vaccination and the proof of vaccination procedures, how fast do you think we can arrive at this point?
I think 2020 has proven that when governments and organizations and people are in dire straits, they can react very quickly. I mean, think about how fast vaccines were produced by several companies around the world. That's quite phenomenal, you know. So I think that it's a good indication that when we need to go through something quickly and make it right, it can be done. The vaccines are a solved problem, I guess. Now the problem is to produce them in larger quantities, but they are there. I think now the best bet would be that bilateral agreements between two countries will start the process, and then regionally it could be augmented. For example, you mentioned that we're here in Singapore. Singapore may do a bilateral agreement with Taiwan, for example, and then the ASEAN could follow these procedures if they prove to work out. In Europe, it could be the same. You know, Germany could do one with England, for example. And if that works, then France could actually do the same thing. I think it's all about somebody starting it, and a bilateral agreement by which both countries recognize the procedures of each other, and also the implementation of these procedures are recognized as being valid and well executed by both parties. And I think from that time on, it can go very faster.
Yeah, I mean, I would love for countries to quickly get this sorted, because we are so eager and dying to visit and to travel around, don't we?
Yes, it's true that we all wish for the quickest time possible, especially since it's been more than a year now, and a lot of us haven't seen our loved ones, and it's harder.
Let's hope for the best. So when it comes to the new normal, something that we have been hearing a lot, it's with regards to a change of travel patterns, is on mass tourism. We see that, you know, people are really thinking about going to exotic destinations, somewhere that people have not visited so often. They want secluded corners, they want time for themselves. How do you see the COVID-19 changing this perception of mass tourism?
I think mass tourism is dead for a while, and I think it's for the better. There are always a series of things that happen after a crisis. You can say that it's after a big crisis that the renaissance happens. So the question is, how is the renaissance going to happen? So mass tourism is definitely one of the I would say the dead men of that renaissance, at least for practical reasons. I wish that it will become dead for good, for philosophical and sociological reasons, also for environmental reasons, but at least for the moment, simply because we have less flights, less airlift from one country to the other, and also because the COVID is associated to mass, precisely. The more people there are entering in contact with each other, the more likely the virus is to spread. So governments will ban that, and you can see that for the foreseeable future, the mass tourism as we used to know it is not going to happen. I think it's a good thing. I don't mean to be an elitist by saying that, but I think that we had gone too far until 2019. 2019, by the way, was one of the best years, I think, in some countries of the world. In Europe in particular, it was the best year ever. after, if I remember, 2015, which was also an amazing year. 2019's level of tourism will not be re-attained before long, because of the fact that mass tourism always represent a large fraction of the figures that we read about tourism and visitation. So what we want now, I think, and this is what we would like to promote on this platform, is to get experiential tourism up, and consumption tourism, which is associated with mass tourism, down.
But because we have all seen how COVID-19 has impacted economies, and don't you think that mass tourism would be an easy way for countries to actually rejuvenate their economy through mass tourism?
You're right. I mean, it's a low hanging fruit, and it's true that if you see the consumption of oil, for example, it's the easy way to go. It's available, it's relatively cheap, and it's efficient. So why not use it? But we know in mass tourism, but also in energy consumption around the world, that those are not sustainable in the short term. We're already at a limit in both cases. So people have seen more images of those, like the Maya Bay beach or Koh Phi Phi beach in Thailand, infested or invaded, choose the verb that you prefer, by dozens of boats and 1,000 people on the beach, and you think about the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, and you're like, what the hell? It shouldn't be like that. That's not the way I was imagining it. So those striking images have been now shared all around the world during the year 2020. I think there's been a lot of reflection about mass tourism. A lot of impactful pictures have been shown around, and people have actually understood the reality of mass tourism. From the part of a government, of a country, obviously it's tempting to try and restart mass tourism, because, like I said, it's numbers. And it fills hotels and it gives jobs to people. But really, I'm not sure that it actually does that well for the economy. I think to a certain degree it does, but overall it does not, because it also, if you think about the ratio between what mass tourism brings to a country and what it retrenches, it takes away from that country, I would like that mass tourism is analyzed now under more lights than just the bottom line of a spreadsheet, because it's actually the way it should be. It should be analyzed more broadly, and then governments may actually change their mind and try to actually change what mass tourism is, because there could still be a lot of people going to some attractive places, and that should be the way. Everybody should be having the occasion to go to Koh Phi Phi or to Santorini, or to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, or to the Great Wall of China. However, it's the way it's done, and I think it's a good idea to rethink mass tourism under this angle. What does it bring, but also what does it take away from the community, from the environment, and also from the soft power and the image of any given destination.
In other words, mass tourism is definitely not sustainable, right?
It's not. It can't be sustainable. It's not. I mean, we know that now. Governments have. I mean, think about. I'm taking the example of Koh Phi Phi again, or Maya Bay. I'm not quite sure anymore actually which is which, but those are beautiful islands with the
the private islands that you see in movies.
Yeah, you see in The Man with the Golden Gun.
And, the sand is so like pretty, the sea is serene, and things like that.
So you know what they did? They actually had to close it down. I mean, what a paradox, right? All of a sudden, from thousands of people, there were none. Why? Because the government had found out that the environment had been so damaged, the corals, the ecosystem had been so damaged that there was no other way for them than to close it entirely. and the same was done in the Philippines. You remember, in Boracay.
Boracay.
Yeah, exactly. And so, do we want that? Is it clever to do such a thing? Because at the end of the day, mass tourism did bring some activity, but then all of a sudden there was nothing. So, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to have a steady and sustainable activity, which brings better jobs and more significance to the jobs that people in the tourism industry execute every day, or do you want the hit and run kind of mentality to be promoted, so that you take everything that you can and then God knows what happens later? That's why I was making a difference between the consumption of tourism and the experience of tourism. I think mass tourism is also associated with consumption and with exhaustion and eradication of resources, but also of the morale of people. You've been to places where there are too many tourists, and you were one of these too many tourists. And you see how the local people feel. They feel aggravated. They feel overwhelmed. And how can they not feel so? Imagine the people in Venice, who normally are 200,000 on a normal basis, and all of a sudden there are 3 million people visiting Venice. How can it be sustainable? It can't be, So I think this is the way we should really go in the future, and this platform is there to promote that, and to promote people who want to promote experiential tourism and who want to boo mass tourism.
Thank you for giving that little promotional and a short teaser, which our audience will be able to experience and to listen to in our subsequent podcast. But also, thank you for touching on all the various points about the side effects and the negative manifestations of this mass tourism with regards to environmental degradation. And indeed, what you are saying, there are so many facets on the sustainability side of tourism that is very difficult to grasp for an average traveler, if I may say.
Absolutely, and sustainability is like a rainbow. You can look at it from the left and look at it from the right. You can also look at it from the center, but you can also look at it as a whole. And you see that beautiful series of colors that intertwine with each other, and you understand that it needs to be all together to form that beautiful rainbow. And I think sustainability altogether, not only in tourism, but in the economy, in whatever you do in human activities, needs to be seen under different angles and to be considered through different lenses. I think it's about jobs. It's about morale, it's about soft power, it's about environment, it's about pleasure, it's about intelligence, it's about aesthetics. All these things must be considered, and they all play a part in the way you experience your travel. What you bring back home is that rainbow that incorporates everything that I just said, and I probably forgot a lot. You remember different aspects of your travel through these lenses. You can't do that through mass tourism. No way.
If there's one thing that you can maybe share with our audience, just one thing about what do you think an average traveler needs to be conscious of when it comes to sustainable travel?
I think this is one of the key elements, is to understand that sustainability is a system. I do not want to say an ecosystem, because ecosystem is reserved for nature, for the natural world. But in a way, you can see it this way. You need to understand that you have a responsibility. It's not only about picking things, like you would see a field full of beautiful flowers, and you would pick the flowers, and then you don't realize that after you, the next person is not going to find these flowers, and is not going to find that field that as beautiful just because you took the flowers before him or before her. So I think the responsibility is also an important aspect. When you travel somewhere, you have a responsibility as a human being, as a traveler, as an economic entity, because you bring your money your force of consumption to those places, and whatever you buy, whatever you elect to buy, whatever you elect to do, to experience, will have an impact on the local community, on the environment of that place where you're going. So it's important to see it not only as an enjoyment, because I think, I mean, the most important is to enjoy what you do, of course, like thoroughly, integrally, but also to understand that it comes with responsibilities, that you're not neutral, and therefore you need to act accordingly.
How do you see an average traveler, responding to these things that you're talking about? Do you think that they have been more conscious than before, or do you think there's a lot of work to be done?
Yeah, there is a lot of work to be done, but if you think about the way history has worked so far, at least in the rememberable past, which can be our lifetime or my lifetime anyway, because I'm old enough to have seen a difference. You can always already see that there are topics that have actually dawned. The coin has dropped in many respects around the world about different things, about, for example, meat consumption, about using a car, about I mean, there are a lot of subjects that seem to be unaddressed and unaddressable in the past, and simply because by virtue of lack of resources, or by virtue of education, or by virtue of higher levels of conscience, which are usually due to frequenting people who are confronted to these problems and understanding their problems, plus being educated about these problems, then people start to realize that, oh my God, I had never thought about that. And they start doing it. Like they didn't used to recycle, now they do. I mean, I'm one of them. I have to admit that 15 years ago, I would throw everything in my trash and then throw my trash in the bin, and that was it. I was carefree. But today, because I know that this is an important issue for my municipality, for my community, and for my country, wherever I live in the world, I do recycle. And I make efforts. I make specific efforts not only to recycle, but also to advocate for recycling. So you see, it's a vicious circle to de-responsibilize people, but it's a virtuous cycle to responsibilize people. When people feel empowered, when they have the conviction that they have understood something, they act on it, and they want to see other people act on it too. So if we go back to your question, yeah, there will be resistances, because the easier way is to pretend that you can do whatever you were doing in the past. But we know after a year of realizations, however the degree of consciousness of the people, they have all, I think, went up 1 notch or 2 notches or 3 notches. So we're on the right path.
Going back to the point of mass tourism and sustainability, there was something that had been brought out, which is the fact of revenge travel. Just because it has been 1 year of people not being able to travel, people have been speculating that once travel restrictions have been lifted, people will be traveling like mad. So how is that going to help with the sustainability angle of things?
I don't know. I have the impression that revenge travel is more a slogan or a posture than a reality. One, we have to admit that travel is going to be a bit more expensive than it used to be. Because there's no mass travel, there will be less low-cost airlines who will be available. Because mass travel cannot exist, most of the people who will travel will be people who either used to travel through mass tourism but will have to upgrade their way of traveling because prices are just higher when you travel on your own than if you travel with a group of 50. Or travel will be something experienced by the more wealthy, people, or the wealthier layer of society, which it has always been. I don't think that those first layers of society, the ones who have the most money, I'm saying, are going to be particularly in trouble, because they never really relied on cheap travel to travel. They would travel just as they please. So I don't think that it will trigger mass tourism. It will just trigger travel as soon as people can, and I'm one of them, obviously, and I'm sure you're one of them too.
Thank you for touching on the point on luxury, because that's actually where we are going to go on the next topic, which is on luxury tourism. And Benoit, you are more than appropriate person to be talking about this topic, just because you have 25 years experience in the luxury hotels and the hospitality sector. So what do you think would be the new luxury travel trends in the future?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I think we haven't entirely comprehended what luxury will be in the future, simply because we have not finished dealing with that crisis, and we don't understand the extent of the difficulties in which the tourism industry will be when travel starts again. I'm thinking about, restaurants and hotels or airlines which would have folded, disappeared simply because of bankruptcy. That will obviously affect the tourism industry, even in the luxury segment in the future. Then there's all the procedures, you used to be able, if you had cash, if you were cash rich, you were used to be able to do whatever you wanted, wherever you wanted. It will not be the case anymore, at least for the foreseeable future, because of the COVID phenomenon. So that will also affect the way people see the luxury in travel. They may actually reevaluate what luxury is. So maybe, and it's just a speculation, I think it will depend on the individuals, but maybe luxury will be more remote places, places where you're on your own, where you don't actually cross too many other people, places that would be perhaps closer to where you are. I was listening the other day to Yann Arthus Bertrand, this photographer who did this fabulous film, which was called Planet Earth Seen from the Sky. I can't remember how it's called in English, and he was saying that during the confinement he was in his country house in the center of France, and he rediscovered the woods around him. Because he couldn't go anywhere, but he could go in the woods. There were no one in the woods, and he was observing, when spring came, all the animals who started to come out and the sprouts on the trees, and he was marveling. That's what he was telling. It was quite heartwarming, actually. He was marveling on those little things of nature, you see. And that man has seen the world like several times, and obviously in the most interesting conditions that you could definitely define as luxury, Yet he was marveling at the sprouts and the little rabbits who were hopping in front of him on the little path of the forest next to his home. So luxury will change, and it's a good thing, because luxury used to be posh places in posh destinations with all the elements that are associated with luxury, like limousines and champagne and caviar and private butler and all these things. That will remain, because it will still be luxury. That won't change. But there will be other forms of luxury which people will start to appreciate. They were always there. And to me, for example, they were always a luxury. Ever since I started to travel, I felt that those were also luxurious ways to travel. But I think more people will embrace that. The seclusion, the exclusivity, the possibility to be away from everyone, a bit like Robinson Crusoe.
Another luxury I believe everyone thinks about is time, because we have been so deprived before, and that suddenly we have all this time in the world. So maybe I love what you shared with me with the fact that he managed to discover the roots. And what is one thing that you have discovered meanwhile, by the way, just on the personal side?
What I have discovered?
Yeah.
You mean about time, for example, or generally speaking?
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about time because it's a very interesting thing. Time is it seems to be stretched these days, and during the COVID year, we have reconsidered that, because all of a sudden, because we didn't have to commute, for example, on average, in the Western countries, or let's say the developed countries. Developed economies. One average worker will commute 1 hour, sometimes plus, in the morning, and the same time in the evening. So that's between 2 to 3 hours of his time, which would be spent commuting from point A to point B. That's just one example. All of a sudden, we didn't have to do that. Okay. Another example is that the rhythm of the workday when you were at the office was very stable. You would have to work from 9 to let's say 12:30, and then you would have your 1 hour break. I'm talking about the average persons. Of course, there are exceptions. And then you would come back and then work until 6, for example, and then commute. Okay, so that would be very, very stable, and every day was the same. So you were ingrained in a certain degree of routine, which you actually totally lost sense of, and time was that. And then all of a sudden, time is this. Time is no commuting. So the 1.5 hour or the 1 hour that you used to commute, maybe you're using it to do something else. Sleep a bit more. We know that a large fraction of the population around the world is sleep deprived. At least we should know. That's one example. Read more. Read books. Listen to music. Engage with your loved ones, your children, your wife, and your husband, because you actually have time to do that upon breakfast, and no longer just sip, gulp your coffee and then go to work because you're busy and you've got your train to catch. So all these things have actually redefined time. Of course, time is still the same. We still have 24 hours in a day, right? Nothing has changed in that respect, but it has changed in the way people perceive it and in the way people use it. And I think you're absolutely correct. It applies to travel as well. What do you do of your time when you travel? And I think people having experienced those happy moments. I believe that if you ask most people about the year 2020, they will tell you one good positive thing is this one, is that they had more time and they rediscovered certain activities. They looked inwards a little bit more. Of course, some people kind of spoiled it by going on social media more than they ever did. Whatever, it's their choice. But I know that there's a large fraction of the people who actually did not do that. So I think this is it's a great teaching.
Definitely, and people have more time to do what they think they do when they're on travel, but now they're doing on their everyday life, which is a great thing. But that also presents, change in luxury travel patterns.
Totally.
So, as with the 25 years of experience, which I mentioned earlier, what do you think destinations can do better to promote the concept of luxury from now on?
I mean, one word that comes to mind is experience. I touched on it a bit earlier when we were talking about mass tourism, consuming tourism as opposed to experiencing tourism. I think obviously the focus will need to be on experience. It started a few years before. It's not going to fall from the sky all of a sudden. It's a phenomenon that we see we see growing, and we've seen growing in the last few years. Airbnb, for example, you remember they started to introduce those local experiences. Whenever you would book a place, they would propose to you to engage in this pottery class, or to go with this young lady on a delicacy tour in the city, things like that, and it received a lot of success. You started to see hotel chains coming up with experiences based from their hotel and engaging with the local community. And then you saw websites such as Scoot, which is based in not Scoot. Scoot is the
airline
the
company.
airline.
I think you were mentioning about
Yeah,
Klook.
that's because we live in Singapore. No, about
Klook, right?
Klook, yeah. Klook, Klook, which is based in Hong Kong, and which is the epitome to this day of experiences, because they actually chose. This was their business model from the start. They chose to actually promote experiences and to link them. Now they are doing it because they became a unicorn company. So they've raised so much money that now that they have actually expanded their activities so much that they have the financial backing to be able to develop technologies which will link their portfolio of experiences with more local, community-based experiences, which are more, so to speak, normal, like renting a car or sleeping in a hotel, whatever. But you could see that it was coming. But 2020 and the COVID year has obviously increased this phenomenon. One of the things that we've seen, for example, it's very interesting, is that instead of remaining idle because we couldn't travel, some local people in local communities decided to actually focus and emphasize on those experiences to reconquer or conquer the heart of the local people, because those are the low-hanging fruits. Why not? We live in Singapore. It would be nice to actually learn new things, experience new experiences about Singapore, which we never thought about before. If somebody lets it known to us and lures us to these experiences, we will actually try one or two. And then we'll be happy to have done so, and we'll do more. So you've seen this phenomenon of a development of local experiences, which was actually capitalized on by websites like Klook. These experiences, for the moment, are only buyable by the local people because of the restrictions in travel. But tomorrow they will be available to long-haul travelers or middle-range travelers, all the same. So we're creating a new way to travel, a new way to experience travel, which is based on interacting with the community in a respectful manner, opening your heart and your mind to the way of living of these people, being curious and enjoy what they have to bring to the table. This is the tourism that I love, and that's the tourism that we must promote.
Things like Klook and like what you said, experiences, most of them are pretty, traveler induced. Like you have to go on and you have to book it yourself. And when it comes to luxury travel, as far as my experience goes, they would prefer to use a travel advisor or a travel planner, to come up with that perfect itinerary for them. So that brings me to a very important question that I guess a lot of people have been talking about. Is there still a value for travel advisors from here on?
Yeah, it's a very good question, particularly this year. I mean, assuming that this year is not going to be that different from 2020. So many of these travel agents, travel counselors were furloughed, or had to retire, or were just made redundant because their travel agency closed down. So there is a natural question about their future and about the viability of their profession. One strong message that I really want to share here is that there will always be, and I would even say even more so in the future, a place for talented and knowledgeable travel counselors. And you're right. Going on a website, let's say Klook, for example, to find an experience is one thing. But it is usually not through those tools that you will actually learn about the destination. You will know how to spend time on the destination, which is already better than just going without knowing anything. But it will be difficult for you to deduct what to do, in which sequence, when to doing during the day. If you have a top 3, which one should it be? All these questions are not going to be answerable through websites before long. Maybe AI, artificial intelligence, will somehow help in the future, but I don't believe that people want to rely on a robot. So if you have a travel counselor who's knowledgeable because he's been there several times, or she's been there several times, she or he has interacted with the local guys, the local community, eaten the local food, gone to the local tourist attractions, experienced those hikes, those sports activities and whatnot, he's the best advocate for you to actually choose and pick and choose what you want to do according to your personal taste. So I believe that at the moment they're in trouble simply because of the economic crisis induced by the COVID, but their role will be reinforced in the future, those who are knowledgeable.
That's very good news for our travel advisors who are listening to our podcast. I guess that gives them some glimmer of hope, because obviously for the whole year they have been idle, and hopefully 2021 this year, and now we just celebrated Chinese New Year. Hopefully it would be a brand new beginning for all of us, and then hopefully this year we were going to be able to travel again. And so that brings me almost towards the end of the podcast, really. And that brings me also an opportune moment to ask you, maybe if you have a crystal ball in front of you, do you think we will be able to travel again this year in 2021?
You can travel. There are places which are open already. I think of Dubai. I think of the Maldives. There are a few places which actually managed to cope well with the virus, and who somehow have introduced procedures whereby they vaccinate you upon arrival, which I believe is the case in Dubai, or will sort you out in such a manner that the procedure for you to do your quarantine will be acceptable and agreeable. So there are people who travel, and travel has not entirely stopped. It has actually restarted. Now, to the extent of what we knew in normal years like 2017 or 18, for example, which were not the peak that 2019 was, probably not. I mean, it's just simply because there are, in the airlines, for example, have not reintroduced many of the routes that they used to fly. If you go to the average airport today, they fly 10-15%. And if you're lucky, of the flights that they used to operate and to program in 2019. So no, definitely. And this takes time, you know. You can't just ground an aircraft and just take it back, switch on the, and then fly it. It requires personnel, so you have to keep on to retrain the pilots if for some reason they were not trained enough. I'm sure that some airlines have done that job, but some may have not had the finance to do that. And so on. A lot of things are needed to actually supply travel. And I think the major obstacle is at the moment is the supply, is the people who make travel possible. Not so much the countries which make travel agreeable because they welcome you, but mostly how do you go there, and how easy and nice and acceptable it is to go there. I think those are the main constraints, and that won't be solved before the end of the year. You will see a gradual improvement as people get vaccinated, as, like I said in the beginning, the bilateral agreements start to be implemented. And so you will see Singapore going to Hong Kong, Hong Kong going to Singapore, things like that. So that will obviously kickstart tourism again, but it will take time.
So what is the timeline that we're looking at for like a travel recovery, in your opinion?
Well, it depends. It depends if you call a recovery reaching the level of 2019. I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, 2019, like you said, and like we observed, it was an exceptional year. I mean, we have seen so like crazy figures of how everyone did so well, travel spending wise, air flight wise, everything. So maybe we'll say to go back to a little bit more normal, like maybe in 2016, 2017 times. What do you think?
Probably in 2 years, 2 or 3 years. I would say 2023 is most likely to be like that. But again, it's not necessarily bad news, because I think that a large fraction of tourism figures are due to mass tourism. So we've said, I think both of us and many of the people who are listening to us today agree with the fact that it's not something we should wish for, and therefore, if we can recover the good tourism, the experiential tourism that really brings money and wealth in all its possible forms, human wealth, interactions, cultural exchanges. To the local communities, that kind of travel, I think we can recover it quite quickly.
Let's keep our fingers crossed for that to happen. And so basically we actually talked about a lot about the topic for today, which is what's going to happen for travel in the future. And we talked about the new normal. We also talked about sustainability and how consumers are already aware, and perhaps after COVID-19 is going to be even of an acceleration, like an overdrive of people who adopt more sustainable traveling methods, and that's, to us anyway, it's going to be such a good way forward. So maybe Benoit, would you like to share with us what can we expect from the next few podcasts?
Yes. When we discussed this podcast about 1.5 years ago, I think we were not ready in our head to play a leading role, because we thought that journalists, for example, might do it better. But actually, this year, the year 2020 was a proof that everybody's responsibility is involved. And I just, before I fully answer the question, I wanted to say that it's a great feeling to finally bring something to the table in terms of promoting sustainable tourism, because it's high time, and it's everybody's responsibility. And in the tourism industry, I believe that there are a lot of people who feel the same, who think the same, but they may feel that they are not, they don't have the platform to actually share their ideas, or they don't have the hierarchic position to actually push this agenda forward, or they just don't know how to do it, or they are too shy. I mean, there are many reasons. So I think this was the main idea, and we want to encourage most of the people that we can identify who are in agreement with those basic ideas that tourism should be sustainable, travel should be sustainable, to bring their best practices, their ideas to this platform, to Horus. It can be through the hospitality industry. It can be through the hospitality industry being hotels, or being also restaurants, for example. It can be through the airlines. It can be through all the operators who make travel possible, the destination management companies, travel agencies. It can be journalists. It can be intellectuals, people who actually write books about tourism, researchers, people who work for the international organizations. It can be people who work for animal welfare in tourism. It can be people who work in community tourism, which aims to use the local community, give jobs to help local communities through tourism, whereby you buy a travel package and then you go and help build things like Habitat for Humanity does that, for example. So all these things, I think, participate to making sustainable travel awesome, remarkable, and something that people should aspire to, because they are themselves participating in making travel sustainable. So that's the idea.
Thank you for sharing with that. And before we are going to end every podcast, actually I'm the interviewer, which is me in this case, will be asking the interview what is something that you have learned in 2020 and the advice you would give to our audience. So what would that be in this case?
Ooh, I wasn't expecting that, really. One thing that will remain, I'm sure, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, if I'm still alive, touch wood, is that year 2020 was a year of realizations. It was a year that somehow manifested emotions, ideas, imagination that I had in myself, and I believe many people had in themselves, and made them obvious all of a sudden. They were like, it's like Archimedes in his bath. Eureka, because we had time. Because we had time to think, I was in my bath. We were all in our bath like Archimedes, and we all of a sudden we had the realization. And I think if a fraction of the people who realized those aspirations, understood the things that they understood, can implement these ideas, advocate for these values, it will be the salvation for the humankind. I mean, it looks like I'm talking like a religious leader, but actually, I believe that a small group of people can change the world. It's like that it starts. I think it's a famous quote from anthropologist Margaret Mead from America, who died in the 20th century. She said that only resolute and motivated, don't quote me because it's exactly that, but she said only a small group of resolute people have been able to change the world. It has always been like that, and we must understand that it's not mass populations who can change anything. It's as individuals who cooperate with other individuals who have the same ideas and want to push the same agenda that we can change the world, and we can change the world for the better. So in our community, the travel and tourism community, which, by the way, represents about between 10 to 12% of the world GDP to date, we have a great responsibility, but also a great power that we should exercise. And if there's one thing that I will remember, is my realization and my understanding that I had this power, and I'm exercising it right now.
It's like Lord Benoit sitting in front of me, trying to enlighten me. But in many ways, it's true. I think 2020 was a rude awakening that every one of us needed, and perhaps even the travel industry needed, just because we have been adopting so many different bad practices. And now that's why we're creating this podcast, to be sharing these best practices with everyone, and hopefully everyone will move ahead like we do. So in short, we can tell that the situation is dynamic and is changing all the time, and we have to constantly benchmark ourselves to be better. So thank you very much, Benoit, for all that you have shared with us this afternoon. It has been very insightful, and thank you also to our audience for paying attention to all that we have shared this afternoon. Be sure to like, to subscribe, and to follow our YouTube channel, because we have such a great lineup coming up. So stay tuned. See you next time.